Numele meu este Paul Mureșan și împreună cu colegii din Edictum vom fi gazda dumneavoastră în această seară. Cine suntem noi? O întrebare importantă. Cine suntem noi și ce ne propunem noi? Suntem un grup de voluntari. Un grup de voluntari și în același timp prieteni care au preocupări comune. Și principala lor preocupare este să păstreze valorile iudeo-creștine în cadrul societății, în spațiu public, unde devine imperativ necesar să-și recâștige locul de cinste. În acest demers, în seara aceasta, vom fi ajutați de invitatul nostru, care e cu totul special, domnul Dennis Prager, a cărui prezentare îi va reveni astăzi scriitorului Mihail Neamțu, căruia îi mulțumim pentru prezență. Duminică seara, împreună cu invitatul nostru, am avut o primă conferință la Ateneul Român, pe care vă invităm și ne-am bucurat să o urmăriți online, în cazul în care nu ați avut ocazia să o faceți deja. Ebraica are o veche zicere, o veche spusă, care sună cam așa: cuvintele care ies din inimă, intră în inimă. Dennis Prager va rosti în această seară cuvinte din inimă și bucuria noastră va fi mare știind că au ajuns în inima celor prezenți, în inimile dumneavoastră. Un scurt itinerar al acestei serii este următorul. După ce domnul Mihail Neamțu va face introducerea conferențiarului în această seară, Dennis Prager va avea mesajul principal. Ulterior, vom asista la un dialog între profesorul Adrian Papahagi și invitatul nostru. Seara o vor încheia întrebările dumneavoastră pe care vă invităm să le adresați invitatului nostru. În cazul în care unii dintre noi nu suntem sau nu ne simțim confortabil să rostim întrebările în limba engleză, asta nu constituie o problemă, le puteți adresa în limba română și domnul profesor Papahagi le va traduce pentru conferențiar. Doar două remarci aș avea referitoare la secțiunea de întrebări și răspunsuri, pe cât posibil să fie o singură întrebare, nu mai multe, și să adresăm întrebările sub forma unei întrebări, nu sub forma unui mic discurs. La finalul evenimentului, doritorii pot să cumpere prima carte tradusă în limba română, a cărui autor este invitatul nostru. Vom avea de asemenea ocazia să primim un autograf de la Dennis Prager și rugămintea noastră, măruntă și succintă, ar fi ca în momentul în care dați share în mediul online să menționați și Edictum Day. Asta să ne ajute la a organiza evenimente următoare și am aprecia mult acest gest al dumneavoastră. În cele ce urmează, așadar, îl vom asculta pe domnul Mihail Neamțu, prezentându-l pe Dennis Prager. Haideți să-l primim pe Mihail Neamțu cu căldură la Cluj.
Bună seara Cluj, bună dimineața America, suntem urmăriți și priviți din foarte multe locuri. E o bucurie și o onoare să fiu chemat să rostesc aceste cuvinte de introducere. Totdeauna când revin la Cluj am sentimente amestecate. Iubirea cea dintâi e Clujul pentru mine, aici m-am format și mă bucur de să fiu în fața atâtor tineri. Când văd mereu tineri, îmi amintesc acele cuvinte ale președintelui american Herbert Hoover, care spunea: fericiți cei tineri, căci ei vor moșteni datoria națională. Avem o datorie cu toții, datoria vieții noastre o vom descifra și în această seară alături de un invitat special, Dennis Prager, un mentor, un martor și o călăuză, alături de, sigur, unul dintre cei mai strălucitori reprezentanți ai generației de tineri umaniști din România, profesorul Adrian Papahagi. Este pentru mine o mare bucurie și onoare să fiu în preajma lor și vreau să vă spun că ei sunt deja pregătiți, ne vor răsfăța. Ei sunt doi luptători, sunt niște reprezentanți de fapt ai unei mișcări conservatoare globale. Sunt pregătiți să vă încânte, să vă ajute, să vă limpezească. Verbul lor este plin de claritate. Câteva lucruri despre profesorul Prager îmi vine să spun, pentru că e un dascăl din punctul meu de vedere, chiar dacă în America se prezintă ca ziarist. În timpul studenției, ca absolvent al Universității Columbia din New York, Dennis Prager a vizitat țările fostului bloc sovietic și a înțeles ce înseamnă suferința unor popoare îngenunchiate. Cum e să fii frate cu frigul, cu foamea și mai ales cu frica. În anii 80, când Doina Cornea aici la Cluj protesta împotriva regimului totalitar al lui Nicolae Ceaușescu, în anii 80, după ce a vizitat România, Dennis Prager s-a întors în Statele Unite cu o decizie luată în suflet, aceea de a pune umărul la distrugerea acestei idolatrii a puterii numită comunism. De la Ronald Reagan la William F. Buckley, așadar, Dennis Prager a cunoscut veritabil giganți ai istoriei contemporane. Și nu folosesc cuvinte nemăsurate. Oameni cu un crez și cu o misiune. Misiunea lor, acelei generații, generația lui Dennis Prager, a fost aceea de a elibera Europa din lanțurile minciunii și ale dictaturii. După 30 de ani de la lupta dată, în anii 80, Dennis Prager revine aici, în Transilvania, și își vede visul tinereții sale împlinit. O țară frumoasă, România, un oraș înfloritor, Clujul, unde oamenii vorbesc deschis și nu în șoaptă despre viitorul civilizației iudeo-creștine. Veți asista așadar la un dialog fabulos. E o seară foarte importantă, dar nu doar la dialogul între două spirite vii sau la dialogul între două tradiții, iudaism și creștinism, sau două culturi, Europa și America. Veți fi de fapt martorii unui moment extraordinar care este de fapt o preluare de ștafetă între generații. Asta se va întâmpla în această seară cu starea de spirit și de prezență pe care noastră o veți acorda. Flacăra libertății, care a fost ținută aprinsă în America profundă atâtea decenii și secole, va trece în sufletul a mii, zeci de mii și poate milioane de tineri născuți în ruinele comunismului și în zorii libertății. Aș vrea să dedicăm, deci, această seară tinerilor frumoși și liberi, cum li s-a spus, celor care n-au emigrat încă și care luptă cu forțele hidoase ale imposturii și ale prostiei. Celor îndrăzneți, aflați la început de drum, celor care simt că România este și țara lor, iată ce le spunem. Oriunde ai ales să trăiești, nu-ți vinde sufletul. Poartă cu umilință straiele demnității. Fii om, pentru că omul sfințește locul. Nu te lăsa dezonorat. Cultivă frumusețea și înțelepciunea. Când te-ai îndrăgostit, așterneți sentimentele pe hârtie. Cuvântul s-a făcut trup și visul mărturisitorilor lui trăiește prin tine. Caută să deosebești adevărul de minciună, prietenia de cârdășie. Creierul de student e ca un burete. Învață, deci, istoria neamului tău, dar și limbile străine. Ochii tăi sunt vioi, citește, deci, o carte. Desigur, cu autograf. Poteca vieții e strâmtă, dar tu privești înainte. Caută, deci, locul inimii, gândește cu propria ta minte, alungă cinismul, stinge furia, cultivă admirația și nu uita că Dumnezeu te iubește. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Mr. Prager, maybe you just hear me, maybe you're around. We know that you are an expert in the book of Exodus. This is the wonderful book just published by Mr. Prager. I'll tell him, welcome to the promised land. As you probably know too well, and he knows very well, Moses was a great leader of the Jewish people. But he had two problems. One, that he was stuttering, he couldn't speak properly. The other one was that he was a bit tone deaf. So after he received the 10 Commandments, God told him, now go, take your people and bring them to Transylvania. But because he was deaf, he couldn't hear well, so he went to Transjordania. Hence all the problems in the region. Dear Mr. Prager, Adrian, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker today hardly needs any introduction, but he is a great storyteller in the grand tradition of Martin Buber. And he believes, among many other things, that happiness is a serious problem. That's why tonight I should like to put forward my introduction to this extraordinary debate in the form of a narrative. I'll tell you a story. You're getting used to that. It's a story for children written by Kipling, but which is very rarely read as a moral allegory for the grown-ups. The story sounds like this. In the thick jungle of the Indian subcontinent, a delicate boy was born from two unknown parents. It is first Akila, the affectionate wolf, and then Bagheera, the solitary panther, who take care of the abandoned child. With their help, Mowgli becomes an exploratory teenager who later embarks on a journey filled with anxieties and surprises. Gradually, the jungle boy discovers the promises of the wildlife. Curious by nature, he's trying to fit somewhere, using each and every adventure to sharpen his survival instincts. He first escapes from the grip of Ka, the witch snake, only to find great company in the presence of Baloo, the Epicurean bear. Baloo, the bare necessities of life, will come to you. Now, he is the teacher of simplicity, you might think, Baloo. He tells the man cub how to eat, how to dance, how to have fun. Baloo wants, as I said, just the bare necessities of life. But Mowgli seems to aim higher. Though he is small, he thinks big. In contrast, the bear cannot think or cannot conceptualize, for instance, the threefold structure of human temporality: past, present, and future. He can't do that. So he goes for what's expedient, not for a sense of purpose. Baloo lives in the here and now, while the astute, agile, and ambitious teenager wants to leave behind what? A legacy. A legacy in the history of human civilization. At some point, while he's singing, the Foxy Bear says, and I quote, "Don't spend your time looking around for something you want that can't be found." It's the advice that we sometimes get. It's the advice which lacks imagination. It's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for sloth coming from someone who doesn't want his fellow traveler to grow up. Unlike the orangutan King Louis, Mowgli, the man cub, understands that freedom is beyond the bare necessities of life, is beyond necessity. The experience of freedom, let me repeat that, is beyond necessity, beyond the burdens of necessity. So Mowgli knows that freedom means to choose, and more importantly, to choose well. Now, I'll come to an end by telling you the final scene from Walt Disney's superb film, when, maybe you recall, Baloo tries to prevent Mowgli from encountering the girl, Shanti, the beautiful girl singing by the lake. When the rendezvous happens, Baloo gets scared. He's afraid of the unknown, and he's unable to understand the labor of love, as St. Paul put it. A mesmerized Mowgli is about to exit the jungle, but not before Shanti, the girl, finishes her poem. Listen to this. Father's hunting in the forest, I could just sing probably. Mother's cooking in the home. I must go and fetch the water till the day that I am grown. And then, she's making a prophecy, then I'll have a handsome husband and a daughter of my own. And I'll send her fetch the water. I'll be cooking in the home. This is Walt Disney, 1967, before the radical secularization of Europe and North America. It's amazing. What do we get from this story? Well, first and foremost, the notion that life has a meaning only within a consensual and loyal relationship. It's not any relationship. It's a relationship construed as a covenant in terms of mutual affection and celebration of the gift of life. I shall have a handsome husband and a daughter of my own. So Mowgli, while he's leaving the jungle, he's not just listening to a soft, beautiful, and unmistakable feminine voice, but he hearkens unto the promise of love, family, and human flourishing. It's only within this context that discipline becomes liberating and toil becomes a source of joy. So let me wrap it up for you. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, tonight, as we speak, right now, you are embarking on Mowgli's project of self-discovery through pain, sacrifice, and love. Pain in confronting the adversities of life. Sacrifice in building a better future. Love for those you have been united with. It is a story, the one I've just told you, which tells us all that what makes us unique in this world is not the fancy shoes we are wearing. It's not the tie. It's not the clothes. It's not the iPhone that we use in order to take selfies. It's not the car that we are driving that makes us unique. All objects in this world are replaceable. All industrial products are soulless items produced by the machines. Sonia, for instance, the robot, might smile to you, but it will always be a fake, cold, and replaceable smile. So in the post-human future of technocracy, which dawns upon us, we have to maintain that the only given absolute, in opposition to relativism, of our human experience, the only given absolute is the human person, from the day of its conception to its natural death. What makes you all unique is the love you give every day to your spouse, to your parents, to your friends, to your mentor, to your neighbor, but also to your enemies. It is only love that makes the person you are having dinner with a really special one. It's only love that gives us the antidote to the secular relativism of today. All you need is love. Ladies and gentlemen, for us all tonight, Dennis Prager. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I have many things to say. First, of course, is a big thank you to Michael for the most poetic introduction of my life. I think I will now call myself Mowgli Prager. It goes well. Well, this is very special to me for many reasons. One is that I am back in Romania after 40 years. I was here in my 20s when it was a communist country, or more accurately, when it was a country ruled by communists. And I hated communism because my favorite verse from the Bible, one that many of you will recognize, but I think few of you would think of if you were asked, what is your favorite verse in the Bible? But it is mine. And it is, those of you who love God must hate evil. And I was born hating evil. In fact, I'm still working on loving God as much as I hate evil. I admit it. I have emotional difficulties with the creator of the universe, whom I believe in 100%. But there is so much unjust suffering in the world, I have never made full peace with it. But I hate evil, and I hated communism like I hated Nazism. And so I specialized in communism at my university. And I came to Eastern Europe year after year, and I went to the Soviet Union. I'd learned Russian. And it was quite something. I learned 2 words in Romanian, I'm sorry to say. But it's the truth. They were the only 2 words I learned. Trăiască partidul. Because that's all I saw everywhere, was Trăiască partidul. And you didn't need to know Romanian to know what that meant, because I knew from the Soviet Union what all the signs meant, hailing the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the Soviet people, the builders of communism, and all of that. To think of the 100 million people, 100 million between China and the Soviet Union and East Europe and Ukraine, which you could include in either of those 2 places, and Cambodia and other communist countries and the Koreas, you get to 100 million dead people, just dead, not war, not one killed because of war. All civilians. Do you know what percentage of Americans know that about 100 million people were killed by communism in the 20th century? Maybe 1%. Maybe that is an optimistic number. They all know about Nazism, and people should know about Nazism. As a Jew, I certainly want people to understand what the Nazis did. But because I take evil seriously, how could I only take Nazi evil seriously? So that is why I came here. And I had actually, as painful as it sounds, I had a somewhat good time, because as a young American, I was somewhat celebrated. People enjoyed meeting a young American. Not many Americans came to Eastern Europe when it was communist. And so I enjoyed the Romanian people, but there's no comparison. You know, you can't know how good it feels for me to meet free Romanians. It is just, it's a dream. I have the chills as I talk to you, because at that time, it didn't seem as if communism would end in my lifetime, and I was just 25 years old. But it did end after too many people suffered. Anyway, it is just wonderful to be back. My wife is with me, the co-founder of Prager University, Alan Estrin, and his wife are with me, and we are really enjoying our trip greatly. I think that you have something to say to the world. You may not think in those terms, but I was asked in Bucharest at the end of my lecture, what can Romanians do? And after all, people look to America, for example. I am here to tell you the sad story that America is so conflicted. The left has done so much damage to Americans' moral framework. It has done so much damage to the belief that America has any message to mankind, that now that message, the message that there is a God and that God is the source of human rights, that message, which came originally from America as a country, it came originally from the Bible, but as a country, that is in the Declaration of Independence of the United States. That our Creator has given all of us inalienable rights, rights that cannot be taken away. But today, if you go to any American university, almost any American university, or any British university, or any Western university, no one teaches that God is necessary for human rights. They teach the opposite. God is unnecessary. God is a waste. God is for fools. So who knows? Why can't the great message come from Romania? You have to start thinking that way. It's an open world now. You are a great example, this great large number of you who are here tonight. I want you to start thinking in those terms of not only influencing Romania, but influencing Europe and the world. The fact that I am invited here to speak to you and that so many of you are here, this is a very important moment. So I want you to think about that. As I ended the talk in Bucharest, when this was, I think, one of the final questions, there's a famous verse in Isaiah that the law shall go forth from, I'm translating from Hebrew, the law shall go forth from Zion and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. But why not Bucharest and Cluj? I mean it very sincerely. Why not? You have to think that way. And this is an American telling you in all sincerity that you have to think that way. One example of that is Addictum Dei, the people who have made this possible. I have met their leaders. These young men that I have met are just extraordinary. My wife and I have already invited all of them to live with us in our home in California, should they ever make it to Los Angeles. And I mean it. So I'm telling you so that they know it was a sincere invitation that to stay in our home. The four of us just fell in love with these wonderful men who are running this great organization of Addictum Dei. So I would like to begin. I would like to talk to you tonight about the conflict, the great conflict, capital G, capital C, the great conflict in the world today, and especially in the West, between the biblical worldview, or Weltanschauung, and the modern worldview, especially the worldview of the dominant culture of the left, which is leftism. Let me explain something about leftism. I do a radio show in America. I've been doing it for 33 years, 3 hours every single day across the United States. And I have been saying on my radio show for many years the following: the most dynamic religion in the world of the last 100 years has not been Christianity, it has not been Islam, it has been leftism. That is the most dynamic religion in the world by far. Not only that, leftism has influenced Judaism and Christianity far more than Judaism and Christianity have influenced the world in the last 100 years. Leftism is the religion of the university, it is the religion of the news media, it is the religion of the social media, it is the religion of the entertainment media. It is the dominant way of thinking in the West. It isn't even questioned. Leftism dominates the intellectual life of the West the way the Catholic Church dominated the intellectual life of medieval Europe. And maybe more so, maybe more so. Maybe there was more dissent in medieval Catholicism than there is today at where I went, Columbia University in New York City. I'll give you an example. I mean, there are so many examples. Here, I'll give you two examples. Harvard University, the most prestigious university in the United States. It is affiliated with a major hospital in Boston. That is where Harvard is located, near Boston, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This called Brigham and Women's Hospital, or Women and Brigham Hospital, doesn't matter. This hospital, affiliated with Harvard, has paintings of the great doctors who made the hospital and made American medicine possible. They have all been taken down as of last week because they are white males. Do you understand that? First of all, do you understand how racist that is? It is, in other words, it doesn't matter if you discovered penicillin. It doesn't matter if you discovered antibiotics. It doesn't matter if you developed anesthesiology for surgery. It doesn't matter if you found a cure for diabetes, or at least insulin to reduce the terrible effects of diabetes. It doesn't matter. It matters whether you are white and male. This is Harvard. 2 years ago, I debated at the Oxford Forum, the most prestigious debating forum in the world. The subject of that debate was, who is the greater obstacle to peace in the Middle East, Israel or Hamas? I give you my word, my friends are here, they know I made this call. I actually called up Oxford, I called them on the telephone, because I was sure that I got the topic wrong. It was not possible. That's like debating who is the greater obstacle to peace in the 1930s, Hitler or Churchill? Okay? To me, that's the same debate. So I actually called Oxford and I said, I'm curious, could you please tell me the topic of the debate that I will be engaged in November? And they said, that's the topic. And I couldn't believe it. And by the way, you know what won? There were 400 Oxford students there. The vote was approximately 250 said Israel was the greatest obstacle, and 150 said Hamas was the greatest obstacle. And I said, by the way, you can see my comments on YouTube. And you can see, I said, this would be, if you vote to blame Israel rather than Hamas, this will be the first time in history that a free country was determined to be the one that wants war against the police state. Every war is a free country versus an unfree country or two unfree countries. There are no wars between free countries. And every time there is a war between a free and a non-free country, it's the non-free country that wants the war. Free countries don't want war. They want to be left alone. They want to go, they want to watch a movie. They want to raise children. They want to have a life. They don't want death. Police states want death. And the police state at Oxford won. That is how sick the Western University has become. In America, it is so difficult for a conservative to speak at a university that whenever any of us are invited, they send police to guard us. I went to the University of Wyoming last year to speak, among the universities I spoke at, and a left-wing instructor wrote against my coming, that I am a bigot and a racist and all of the usual things, and an anti-Semite. So this was wonderful. You see, they don't know anything that we stand for. They know nothing about us. So they have a list, and they throw darts at the list. And, oh, will it hit racist? Oh, call him a racist. Will it hit sexist? Call him sexist. Anti-Semite? Call him anti-Semite. So the darts hit anti-Semite. So this Jew is an anti-Semite. So when it came out that it was not really likely that a Jew who writes Torah commentary is an anti-Semite, she dropped it. But she kept the other ones, which are equally absurd. This is what is happening. I don't know if it's happening at universities in Romania. I just don't know. If it isn't, then you really, really can be a model to the Western world. Because you will have among the only universities in the West that have not been taken over by moral sickness. This is the power of the left in the world. It is a broken moral compass. That's what is happening. Let me give you just a few examples of the biblical worldview versus the modern, progressive, leftist worldview. No order of importance. Number one, we who take the Bible seriously understand that people are not basically good. This is basic Jewish and Christian doctrine. Human nature is not good. People don't like to hear that. So I have been asked for nearly all of my life, well, wait a minute, what about babies? Aren't babies good and innocent and lovable? And the answer is, babies are innocent and lovable, but not good. Okay, let's be honest. If a baby could speak, this is what a baby would say. I want mommy, I want milk, I want to be taken care of, and if you do not do all of these things immediately, I will ruin your life. Now, why is that good? Babies are not good. I'm sorry. Even I wasn't good as a baby. I was as selfish a baby as every other baby. Babies are narcissists. The center of the world is their world. Everything else exists to revolve around it. They are the sun. Parents are planets. This is such nonsense. Where do we come up with this notion? If people were basically good, why would every parent who wants a good child say 10, 20, 100,000 times, say thank you, say thank you, say thank you? What do you say? Thank you? Say thank you. Why isn't once enough? Gratitude is a major moral statement. If you can't be grateful, you are not decent, you are not good. But we have to teach children to be grateful. Say thank you. Say please. We are not born basically good, and it drives me crazy when people say people are basically good. I said, do you not know history? Have you not read of all the torture, slavery, and rape and murder in history? Are you ignorant? If you know anything, I spoke at Berkeley, famous or infamous Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley, also this past year. And instead of a speech, I decided to debate two left-wing students, which is almost redundant because almost all the students at Berkeley are left-wing. But nevertheless, I told them, choose your brightest, finest left-wing examples, and I will have a dialogue debate with them. That's also on YouTube, you can watch it. And all I did not want to win a debate. I wanted to make it clear where we differ. This to me is a win. If you can show where you differ from the left, you win. Because then anyone with common sense and decency will say you are right. So I don't want to win, I want to clarify. So at the very end, I asked them, do you think people are basically good? Both of them said yes. Then they spoke, and then I said, do you know why you think people are basically good? Because you have grown up in America, where people are pretty decent and pretty good. By the way, I would say the same thing here in Romania, or many Western countries, where life has been good for people. They didn't grow up in World War II or right after World War II. They didn't grow up as your parents grew up under communism. They didn't see people taken away in the middle of the night by Stalin. They didn't hear screams at Buchenwald and Auschwitz. They live in America. It's easy to believe people are basically good in Nebraska or in Wyoming. That's of course. So they're naive. But you know what? It is a sin to be naive as an adult. If you're naive when you're 5, okay, but not after 5. And do you know who is not naive? People who believe in the Bible. I knew people were not basically good when I was 6 because I read it in the Bible. In Genesis, God announces, Yetzer lev ha'adam ra min urav. The will of man's heart is towards evil from his youth. There you go. So I knew it. I understood it. I understood the most important question society can ask. You know what it is? How do you make good people? Every other question is secondary. That's the only question ultimately that matters aside from is there a God and the great philosophical, theological questions, but the great practical question is how do you make people good? I've heard that there is some corruption in Romania. I'm not sure that that is true. I heard it. I don't even know where I read it. So I am curious, wouldn't the most important question in Romania be, how do you raise people from childhood not to be corrupt? Simple. It's that simple. What is a more important question than that? Dialectical materialism? What is more important? But it's not asked. People who believe people are basically good don't ask the question because you don't have to ask the question, right? We're basically good. You don't have to make good people. Just show them love. But if all you give a child is love, you will have a spoiled brat. I don't know how to say that in Romanian. I wish I did. Spoiled brat. What is a spoiled brat? Spoiled means you take things for granted and you are not grateful, and a brat is a brat. I don't know how to do brat well. I should have had my Romanian English dictionary for a few words. In other words, not a wonderful person. There are many people who grew up with love who don't turn out very nice. You know why? They weren't given discipline, and they weren't told the great religious lesson. Your greatest enemy is you. I went to religious school, a Jewish religious school, half day in Hebrew, half day in English, until I was 18 years of age. And I learned a very important thing, that the greatest problem in Dennis Prager's life is Dennis Prager. Not my parents, not my society, not economics, me. And you know what you learn in secular school? That your greatest enemy is society. You don't learn to fight you. A religious child learns to fight his or her nature. And that's the only way you will ever be a good person, if you fight your nature. Life is a constant battle with yourself. Who is taught that today? I don't know in this country, but it certainly is not taught in my country. Children are not taught to fight themselves. They're taught to fight racist America, sexist America, unequal America, imperialist America. Everything is outside of themselves. They are wonderful. When I was a kid, there was a very famous book. It was in the 60s or 70s. I'm okay, you're okay. It was a perfectly secular book. The religious book is, I'm not okay and you're not okay. That's a religious book. So we better do something about it. Just that alone is a huge difference between the religious Weltanschauung, the religious worldview, and the secular worldview. Just that alone, that people have to fight themselves, that we're not basically good. We have to fight all of our impulses. People know it about eating, right? Most people have to fight the desire to eat cheesecake all day, or chocolate bars, right? Because if you didn't hold yourself back, you would eat yummy foods all day. So there's a part of you that says, no, you can't, you can't, you can't, you can't. Much of life is you can't. Certainly true morally. Number two, the religious worldview, the Judeo-Christian worldview, is obviously theocentric, God-centered. But the big difference aside from that is it is anthropocentric. It is human-centered. Whereas the secular increasingly is not human-centered, it's nature-centered. When I say on the radio, I'm sorry, but nature was created for man, not man for nature, I get so much hate mail, it's extraordinary. That I say that because that's the religious view from Genesis. Nature was created for man. That doesn't mean we can abuse it. That doesn't mean we waste it. That doesn't mean we destroy it. Of course not. But it is there for us. There is a very famous Hebrew saying, Bishvili nivra ha'olam. Every person should say, the whole world was made for me. It's a gift of God to me. It's a beautiful way of looking at life. God is above nature. Nature is not God. That is the reason that I said to you my favorite verse in the Bible. Here's the most important verse in the Bible, in my opinion. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is the most important verse in the Bible, because if you do not believe that, don't bother reading anymore. The rest is a waste. And why does it start there? To tell for the first time in the history of the world, it never was said before, that God is above nature. Every religion in the world prior to the Bible said that the gods were part of nature. A god of rain, a god of sun. What was the chief god of Egypt? Ra, or Re, the sun god. They worshiped the Nile River. They worshiped the frog. They worshiped the monkey. And the first sentence of the Hebrew Bible, of the Christian Bible, begins, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God made nature. God is not part of nature. That's extraordinary. And then nature is made and made and made and made, and then the final thing that God creates, the human being, and only then does God say, and God saw it was very good. On the other days of creation, it says God saw it was good. When God created man and woman, God saw it was very good. That's powerful stuff. That's the stuff that you learn if you take your Bible seriously, and these are what we have to confront the modern world with, which has a totally different view. On the cover of Time magazine, many times was Gaia. Have you heard of Gaia? Gaia is the goddess Earth. Many, many, many secular people believe in Mother Earth. That is what their God is. Not God, not the supernatural God. What does supernatural mean? Above nature. God is above nature. Nature is not God. How could nature be God? Does nature have any moral will? Does nature tell you to be kind? Does nature build hospitals? The law of nature is Darwin's law, the survival of the fittest. God's law is the survival of the best, not the survival of the fittest. That's nature's law. Nature is amoral. There's nothing moral to be learned from nature. There's a lot moral to be learned from God. So that's a second example of the confrontation between the left, the modern progressive mentality in the West, and the Judeo-Christian mentality. And they know it. They know it. That's why the thing they hate the most is ultimately God and religion. That's what they most want to get rid of. We at Prager University, by the way, how many of you have seen a Prager University video? That's wonderful. The rest of you? You are all welcome to watch it, because we are making the case for these values 5 minutes at a time, just 5 minutes. It's important stuff. And if everyone came out in Romanian, it would be a joy for us. We want it in every language possible. We will have 1 billion views this year. And that's a very serious thing. Nature is not God. It was created for man. So people call up and they say, oh, so you mean if there's no man, nature doesn't matter? I said, that's right. Exactly right. If there's no man to appreciate nature, nature doesn't matter. What difference does it make what an ant colony is doing? Exactly. Number 3, we who take the Bible seriously know the following. Do not trust the heart. Today we live, well, let me give you a little introduction. There was the age of Renaissance, right? The age of reason, and now we live in the age of feelings. How do you feel about it is now the question. Not is it right or is it wrong, how do you feel about it? So let me tell you something that is very important. So important that if I am given one lecture to a high school in America, this is what I talk about. Feelings. And I tell them something that most of them have never heard in their lives. Nobody except you and maybe your mother cares about how you feel. No one. There are 7 billion people on earth, and only one of them gives a damn about how you feel. Your mother. And if she's really, really a good mother, even she doesn't. This is nobody tells, this is like unbelievable. When I talk about this, I see their faces. If I told them that the earth was flat, they would be more receptive to what I had to say. No one cares how I feel? Isn't how I feel the most important thing in the world? No, it doesn't matter at all. It doesn't. It matters to you. Oh, I made a mistake. I always add one other. Your therapist. I made the mistake. It matters to your mother and your therapist. So there are 2 people in the world out of the 7 billion who care how you feel. You know what the rest care about? The rest care about how you act, not how you feel. I use as my example, because the Bible is the source of wisdom for me, I use as my example the 10 Commandments, specifically the commandment, honor your father and mother. One of the insights I bring in my commentary on the 10 Commandments and my commentary on Exodus is, we are told to, in the Old Testament alone, we are told to love our neighbor, we are told to love God, and we are told to love the stranger. We're never told to love our parents. There's no commandment to love our parents. There's a different commandment for parents. Honor your mother and father. Honor your father and your mother. They are the only creatures in the world, the only beings we are told to honor, our parents. That's how important parents are. But we are never told to love them. And there's a reason, and that is because the Bible is wise. It understands very, very many people have problems with their parents. So you may not be able to love your mother or your father. That's not God's business, and that is not man's business. That is your business. God's business and man's business is that you honor your parents anyway, even if you don't love them. I begin my commentary on the book of Exodus, 500-page commentary. In my introduction, I am very open because I include myself in the book. And I open by saying that when I was in my teen years and early 20s, I did have emotional difficulties with my parents. But I always honored my parents. They had no idea about those difficulties because I honored them. When I left my parents' home at the age of 21, there was not a week in my life, anywhere I was in the world, that I did not telephone my parents. Every week of my life, until my father died at 96 and my mother at 89, I called my parents every single week. It didn't matter where I was or what I was doing. And the reason was God told me to honor my parents. It makes a difference if you believe you're told by God something. It does. When people say to me, oh, I don't need God, I'm a good person without God, I always bring this example. Do you call your parents every week? And they said, what does that have to do with anything? I'll tell you what it does. It says in the book I believe God gave, honor your father and mother. You don't believe God told you to honor your parents, so you don't. They don't have an answer because there is no answer. They do what they feel is right. And if they don't feel warm to their parents that week, why call them? There are millions of Americans who don't talk to their parents ever. This is a national tragedy in the United States. I hope it has not afflicted Romania. There are parents who call my show who have never seen their grandchildren because their children have not introduced them to their own grandchildren. That's how much narcissism has taken over in my country. The notion that I owe my parents something, that's biblical, not progressive, not secular. You don't owe anybody anything, as it were. So, don't trust feelings. How you feel is nice, but not important. How you act is everything. That is true in every realm of life. We have to be honest in these matters. Men's reactions to attractive women are not only, gee, I would love to talk to her about medieval Romanian poetry. Right? Let's be honest. Men are programmed, might I add, by God to react a certain way to women. So the issue is not how you react, it is how you act. You have to act in a certain way. It's true in every area of life. Food, sex, you name it. The issue is not feelings, the issue is behavior. So we were told not to trust the heart. And now let me give you one more example, but it has 5 examples within the one. The Torah in particular, the first 5 books of the Bible, which is of course equally holy to Christians and Jews, is a book of distinctions, of differences. And I will give you 5 distinctions that the modern world is trying to destroy and which the biblical world needs us to preserve. Number 1, good and evil. We are told in the modern world that there is no such thing as good and evil. It is all a matter of individual or societal opinion. Here's a simple example. By the way, I experienced this when I was at Columbia University. I was at the School of International Affairs studying communist countries. And I was told by professor after professor that there's no real difference between the United States and the Soviet Union. They were just 2 superpowers struggling like 2 scorpions in a bottle. That's the example they gave. One was no better than the other. One was capitalism, one was communism. You choose. It was 2 superpowers in struggle. It was not a moral battle at Columbia University. It was an imperialism battle. But anyway, I'll give you another one. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Right? That's a perfect example of all morality is in the eye of the beholder. I think this is good, you think this is bad. That's all. There's no good and evil distinction. That is basic distinction to the Judeo-Christian worldview. Number 2, man and God. In the Bible, God is God and man is man. Period. End of issue. But man wants to be God. That is why we eat from the tree of knowledge. The serpent says, eat from the tree and you will be like God. I want to be like God. Karl Marx said man is God, and Karl Engels said God is man. Man is God. That was exactly what communism believed. That is why they could kill you when they wanted. They were gods. Communist Party leaders were gods. And they told the truth in Pravda. Pravda, the Soviet communist newspaper, right? There is no truth. The truth is what the Communist Party says is true. You had Skintea, which was not the same as Pravda, just it was as bad, but didn't mean the same thing. Number 3, the holy and the profane. If is the word profane clear to you? Okay, profane is the opposite of holy, so whatever word you would think of, that would be appropriate. In secular life, there is no holy, there is no profane. I'll give you a number of examples. Why should people not walk around naked? Why do people wear clothing? Think about it. In a hot climate, why should people wear any clothing? It's a very important question. They don't need it because of the weather. It's hot. Why do people wear clothing? The reason is to distinguish them from animals. We have forgotten this, but it wasn't forgotten originally. God remembered it. The first thing God did for man and woman was create clothing. Right? Think about it. He covered them up when they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The first thing, and what was the first thing they knew? The first thing they knew was that they were naked, sexually naked. They were naked before, but now they knew they were naked because they had sexual awareness. The city of San Francisco, which is the most radical city in the United States, the city of San Francisco had a vote 2 years ago in its city council. Shall we make it legal for people to walk around naked? That's what they debate in San Francisco, just have to know. And the vote was, I believe, 12-11. It was decided by one vote to keep it a law that you had to cover your genitalia in San Francisco. By the way, within a year or two, it will be overthrown. You will be able to walk around naked in San Francisco. San Francisco is the most radical city in the United States, most radical and the most secular. So it makes sense. There is no, this is critical, there is no non-religious reason, there is no secular reason to demand that people wear clothing. There is only a religious reason. We are not animals. Animals are naked, but we are not. Animals' genitalia are exposed, humans' genitalia are hidden. That's the difference. There is no other reason. It is not practical, it is not necessary. That's the reason. The reason isn't even sexual. The reason is holy and profane. The human is not an animal. We are human by virtue, in part, of wearing clothing. It gives us dignity that nudity does not allow, public nudity does not allow. I'll give you another example of the abolition of the holy in modern secular society: cursing, public cursing. In English, the F word, which you would know here, I'm sure, or the S word, that are, when in America, there was actually against the law until about the mid-20th century to curse publicly. You could curse privately. Nobody went to your house to hear how you spoke. But publicly, it was expected that you watched your language. Not anymore. At a recent award ceremony, the famous actor Robert De Niro got up and he just said, "F Trump." Right? How come nobody ever got up and said, "F Obama"? We conservatives disliked Barack Obama as much as they dislike Donald Trump. But we never said F Obama, ever. That's not the way we speak, because we have standards. There are certain ways you don't speak. My city of Los Angeles won the ice hockey championship a few years ago called the Stanley Cup. The mayor of Los Angeles stood up and said in front of 18,000 people at the Staples Center where they play hockey and to hundreds of thousands watching on television, mostly young people, "This is one great effing day for Los Angeles." And he used the F word. And he even said, "I know politicians aren't supposed to use this language, but so what?" Because he's secular. So there's no concept of the holy. The holy is dead. It matters. It matters. Parent-child. The distinction, that's why you honor your parents. There's no commandment to honor your children. Of course you can't abuse your children, that's a given. But you honor your parents. There is a distinction. In America, again, I can't speak for every other society. In America, there's an abolition of the distinction between parent and child. Parents and children are equals. They're friends. Not parents, they're friends. They're their kids' pals, to use the word we use for friend. Buddies, friends. But you only get one chance at the parents, or maybe with a step-parent, a third chance. But that you don't get many chances to have a parent. You get thousands of chances to have friends. But you need a mother and you need a father. That's another distinction that is being abolished in secular society, the parent-child distinction. And finally, the most amazing of all, but I will tell you, I predicted this 25 years ago in writing, the abolition of the distinction between male and female. This is perhaps the scariest, aside from good and evil. It says in the Bible that God created Adam, that is the human being, male and female, he created them. That is the distinction that God wants us to make. There are two types of human beings, male and female. That is being abolished. Teachers in the United States are now told, teachers of little children, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, do not call your students boys and girls. This is a directive to teachers around the United States, not to call 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and 7-year-olds boys and girls. Is that unbelievable? I hope it is unbelievable. But that is what is happening. There is no such thing any longer as male, female. I mentioned in Bucharest, if you sign up for what is it called? Facebook, thank you. If you sign up for Facebook in America, I'd be curious if it's true here, under, you give age or whatever else you give your gender, and you have 56 choices. It's sick. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Imagine that, and God created Adam, and he created 56 of them. This is what is happening. It's really, my friends, and with this I conclude, it is really the biblical worldview versus nihilism. Nihilism is the celebration, essentially, of nothing. That's what we have. We have nothing versus something. And I don't know who will win. Maybe we are going to enter a true dark age in the West. It is very possible. I am not optimistic. I am not pessimistic, but I am not optimistic. I get optimistic when I come here and see all of you here. I admit it. I get optimistic when I see we have 1 billion views. I get optimistic going to college campuses and seeing some who do not buy all of this. But it's bad. It's bad. The United States just left the United Nations Human Rights Council because every single week it condemns Israel. The worst country on earth, according to the United Nations, is Israel. You should visit Israel, and then you will see what a gigantic Orwellian lie, Hitlerian lie, it is that Israel is such a bad country. Arabs sit in the government. Arabs are on the Supreme Court. An Arab won Miss Israel. And then they just say apartheid state. Hamas announces it wishes to annihilate Israel. They sent swastikas over Israel. And the reason they do, they told American radio. They told National Public Radio in America because we want to kill all the Jews. And Israel fights back, and Israel is condemned. It's a sick world. So America, under Donald Trump, left the United Nations Human Rights Council. It's interesting developments, not what you would expect. My friends, one final word. The good have to fight. This is my saddest conclusion in some ways about life. There are many, many good people. There are many kind people. There are many people with integrity and honesty. But there is something that is more important than all of them that is not common, and that is courage. There are a lot of good people, but there aren't a lot of courageous good people. That's important. You have one life, and it's good to fight for the good. Remember, if you love God, you hate evil. That's why I came here 40 years ago, and thank God that evil is gone. But the fight against evil never ends. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
First, let me say something while I'm still standing, because it makes it more difficult to say it while I'm sitting. I just love the way that you embrace good, and that you embrace good in the understanding and in the fullness of your Jewish identity. And this is very important for me. And in the way that you embrace your Jewishness, we embrace our Christianity. And this allows us, because we worship the same God, to embrace each other honestly and in a religious way, worshiping the good. So thank you very much for being here with us tonight. It has once again been a moving experience, and I came with all kinds of questions prepared in advance, but you Americans have the talent to keep it so simple and direct and effective and without footnotes that ultimately all my questions have become irrelevant. But I would like to say something. The room is dark, so you can't see them, but you have seen them on coming here. The room is filled up with our beautiful young students. Can you realize that none of them is hysterical and shouting at you? Can you see that none of them is naked and saying that you're a sexist or an anti-Semite? Can you see, as you actually notice, that you are not guarded by the police? Now, our university may not be top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 100, 200, 300, we are getting near 400. But there is still some sanity around in this, our university. So I think that our students have appreciated. I see you love colleges. Yes, this is what I got from your conferences in Bucharest, that, or they get it wrong. No, you love colleges, but I love my college here. I love my faculty, where I can talk about Shakespeare without having to censure him, where I can talk about goodness and evil without being thrown away from the department, where I can be a Christian without having to apologize, when I can be a Romanian without having to feel sorry for it, where I can be a white male without having to once again apologize for all the terrible oppression that myself, through delegates, have enforced upon other people. So there is some hope. Dennis Prager, you've been spending your last 2 days, apart from lecturing, driving through our country. You drove 500 kilometers. You also came here 40 years ago, which is a very significant period of time, because that is the time Moses and the chosen people wandered in the desert. And this is the period that the Romanian people spent under communism in a crossing of a desert. And this is almost the period that separates us from the fall of communism. So you see, these 40 years of your absence, a lot of things have happened. So in a way, I can say that you've crossed a lot of time and space in Romania in the last period. Now, let me ask you something. What is your take? What is your impression about Romania? What would you say to people? You know, we are obsessed with the West. We love the West. We have so long longed for the West. We see it as an apple, a beautiful red apple. We even tend to neglect that there is a worm in it. We love to import Western apples, but they have been a bit rotten, and at the end of the day, we may end up having to eat the worm for lack of apples. So I'm asking you, what should Romanians take from the West, which we admired so much, which we long to belong to, and what should we omit? Of course, you have said so much of it already, but can you tell our Romanian young people, students, and not only young people, what we should emulate and what we should at all costs avoid?
There's a blessing and a curse to your 40 years of wandering in communism. The curse was the 40 years of communism. The blessing was, in effect, that the infection of, ironically, you were guarded from the infection of leftism, because communism is sui generis. It has nothing to do with anything. I mean, it's obviously radical leftism, but you were kept away from the trends of thought in the West. That, ironically, was a blessing. I say this only with sadness, because I want to protect Western civilization with all my heart and all my soul. Western civilization is what, after all, is what abolished slavery. Nobody else abolished it before the West did. When people in my country talk about American slavery, of course they're right, but they don't talk about the fact that slavery was universal. Africans had as many slaves as Americans did. Arabs had as many slaves as the whole New World had. There was no culture it's just Greece, ancient Greece couldn't have survived without slavery. Aristotle thought it was fine. The question is not who had slaves. The question is who abolished slavery. And the answer is Bible-based Westerners abolished slavery. That's it. That is the answer to the question. You teach Shakespeare. Do you know that at the University of Pennsylvania, which is considered one of the, quote, Ivy League colleges, meaning one of the most prestigious colleges in the United States, the long-standing mural painting of Shakespeare at the Department of English has now been taken down. And now there is a lesbian black poet instead. I have nothing against lesbians or blacks. I have something against poets, but nothing against lesbians or blacks. But it's obvious excellence didn't matter. It's all race and gender and all of that stuff. So here is, what am I leading to? You must rethink this utterly understandable idea, and I know enough of Romanian history to understand this yearning for the West, and much wonderful happened in the West, but it's not happening today. It's happening here. You have something healthier. If you celebrate your Romanian identity, that is good. This non-Romanian wants you to celebrate the nation that you are part of. Not in a fascistic sense, obviously, not in a xenophobic sense that others are bad, but to affirm a national identity with goodness is a good thing. It fills one's life with a very powerful sense of bond with another. You should keep that. You should teach it. In the West, it is dying. The nation state is a non-issue. There is a man running for Attorney General of the state of Minnesota for the Democratic Party in the United States. I just saw this yesterday. He is campaigning wearing a t-shirt in Spanish that says, "I do not believe in borders." If you do not believe in borders, that means you do not believe in nations. Nation is a good thing, unless the nation does bad things, obviously. But it is a good thing. You have more to teach us right now. I'm not here to make you feel good. I almost never make audiences feel good. It's just part of my modus operandi. So I'm not telling it to you to feel good. I'm not running for mayor of Cluj. I'm just telling you, you have more to teach us at this moment than we do to teach you. I wouldn't have said this 50 years ago or 100 years ago. But right now, that is the case. And not just Romania, in Eastern Europe generally. There is a healthy, not unhealthy, not fascistic, not xenophobic celebration of the nation state. In the West, they think they are above it. We don't believe in borders. You've all heard of Superman, correct? Have you all heard of Superman? The most famous comic in American history, right? The comic figure Superman. Superman, when I was a child, I saw Superman on television. I watched Superman and I read him in the comic books. The motto of Superman was, "Superman, who stands for truth, justice, and the American way." That was beautiful. I loved it. 10 years ago, Superman, in the comic strip Superman, it is now edited by leftists. Superman stood in front of the United Nations and said, "I am giving up my American citizenship. I am now a citizen of the world." That's a bad development.
All right. Now, let's move to the actual questions. Only 2 or 3 of them, because I would like you to answer more of the audience's questions than what's possible in Bucharest. Now, I pledged on Facebook, and I must keep word, I pledged to interrogate you tonight, not as a conservative, as a fellow conservative, but rather as a leftist. But I'm also a philologist, so please allow me first to say that the leftists are often called progressives and liberals. Now, I would like to object very strongly to those 2 words, and I think that we shouldn't allow people to use words irresponsibly. Now, first of all, there is nothing progressive in wanting to go back to naked animality and to the worship of nature, as you have shown. This means wanting to go behind the Bible, back in time to the pagan pantheistic time. So I would call it regressive. And then there is nothing liberal in wanting to shut other people up and to harass them with the thought police and to kick them out from their departments, or to marginalize them, or to attack them with eggs and all kinds of whatnot. So they are neither liberal nor progressive. I would call them regressive illiberals. But leftist is fine, so I'll stick to leftist. The first question is very difficult, though. It's a question of theodicy, that is to say, the stumbling block of every non-believer. How can a good God, who created the world, who has control of the world, tolerate evil? How can your Bible, your Torah, our New Testament, how can they explain the presence of evil? Why should children suffer? Is that a world with God? How can you answer to that?
Well, I want to address that because I did hint at it. Before I answer it or give you the answer that I've worked out for me, I want to acknowledge the difficulty of the question. So I wrote an essay a number of years ago. Not all of you would agree with me, and that's fine. But I'm very open, and I wrote what I find the most difficult law in the Bible to live by, and that is love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. I honor God, I believe in God, and I obey God. But asking me to love him has been a tough one. When I read about all of the suffering, and I have, since I was a child, I have been fixated on human suffering. It's not easy, both natural suffering and man-made suffering. So I admit to the difficulty of the question. The best answer I heard was given by a rabbi in the 1950s in America named Milton Steinberg, and he said as follows: the believer in God has to answer one question. How do you believe in God with all of the suffering, of the unjust suffering that takes place? The atheist has to answer everything else. I found that to be one of the most powerful answers to that question. We have a difficult question, but they have an infinite number of difficult questions. The atheist cannot explain anything. Why is there a world and not nothing? Why is there life and not only non-life? Why is there consciousness? Why is there Bach? Why is there love? Why is there goodness? Why is there, you name it? The atheist's answer is, I don't know. That's the atheist answer. You ask them, I do, I've debated almost every well-known atheist. How do you explain life from non-life? Well, it's true, Dennis, we cannot explain it today, but maybe one day we will. Okay, fine. So in other words, you have no answer. By the way, you know what is happening? This is really, and you should watch the Prager University video. A professor of astrophysics at the University of California, San Diego, gave this 5-minute course. This is totally fascinating. The odds against life, let alone intelligent life, are so great. There has not been enough time for life to develop in its complexity. There just has not been enough time in this universe. So do you know what atheists have come up with? I mean, serious scientists. The multiverse. You know what the multiverse is? That this is not the only universe. There is an infinite number of other universes. So that in another universe at this time, I am in the audience and you are lecturing. Yes, they believe that. I'm not kidding, they believe it. The amount of nonsense that atheists have to believe or just say everything is random. So I ultimately acknowledge the issue of suffering, unjust suffering, is terrible. But the Bible doesn't deny it. What is the book of Job? The book of Job is all about, and by the way, it's considered the oldest book in the Bible. The book of Job is all about unjust suffering. You know what? Do you know what gives me comfort? Do you know what Israel means? And you should. If you are a Christian who knows your Bible, you should know what Israel means, because it says so in the Bible. I didn't make this up. You don't have to be a philologist. Israel, when God names Jacob, the patriarch, he changes his name from Jacob to Israel. That's how you get children of Israel. Israel means something. Yisrael. Yisra means to struggle with. El means God. The name Israel, the name of the Jewish people, is struggle with God. A Muslim woman called up my radio show about 25 years ago. People can call in on anything on some of my hours. She called in and she said, Dennis, you say we can ask you anything, right? I said, right. So I am a Muslim woman, and I would like to know, why are you a Jew and not a Muslim? And I loved it. I was actually complimented by the fact that she would care to ask me that question, because that means that she thinks that I thought about it, and I did. And I had an answer. I said, I'll tell you why. Because in Arabic, Islam means surrender to God. And in Hebrew, Israel means struggle with God. I rather struggle than surrender. And I'll never forget, I was, to her great credit, she just said, "Good answer. Bye."
So let's switch on the microphone and let's struggle forth then. The book that we have on this table, the first book by Dennis Prager that was translated into our tongue, the Ten Commandments, which you will sign after at the end of this conference. Now, the Ten Commandments, commandments, thou shalt not, isn't this restrictive? What kind of a God is that commands us? Where is our liberty then? Where is our freedom? We live in a world that loves freedom. How can you explain that we should obey commandments?
Well, for one thing, if I don't steal from you and I don't murder you, you have a lot more freedom in life, don't you? So the truth is, this is the recipe for freedom. If people don't murder and people don't lie, especially in court, and people don't covet what belongs to another person, then that means that there's more freedom on earth. This is the recipe for freedom. Freedom is based upon my belief that I have moral obligations to my neighbor. I didn't talk about this as another example of the secular religious difference, but here is another one. The religious mind is obligation-oriented. The secular mind is rights-oriented. You will make a much better society if people walk around thinking, how am I obligated to my fellow human being, than what are my rights?
Yeah, it's also a good way of telling rights from wrongs, but let me keep on pretending to be a leftist, which is very difficult.
Yes, I must say.
Actually, practically, it's not very difficult because all I have to do is to abandon for a while all my decency, my common sense, my culture, and my reason. So I think it's an exercise that can be done. Some people are extremely successful worldwide doing it, but let me pretend on. Now, the Bible is a text, it's a narrative ultimately, and texts are there to be interpreted. This is why we have hermeneutics, this is why we have professors to interpret texts and so on. Whereas nature is there, it's immediate, you can touch it. Human nature, even human nakedness, which you seemed to object to, it's there. Why should this nature be objectionable on the sole account of a narrative? How can you answer that?
That's why I said the most important verse in the Bible is the first. If you don't think God created the world, then there's no reason to listen to him. Then this narrative is pointless. But ultimately, on purely reasonable grounds, on grounds purely of reason, the thought that all of this came about on its own is so, I've said this for so long, at least since the invention of the computer. If we sent a mission to Mars, the planet Mars, and we found a computer, wouldn't we assume an intelligence made it? DNA, the instructions in all of us and in every living being are so much more complex than any computer code. Why would we assume that an intelligence did not make intelligence? If we found inanimate intelligence, we would assume intelligence made it. We are animate intelligence. Why don't we assume intelligence made us? So once you assume that, and then you have the question, does the creator care about his creations? It would seem to be an odd creator who didn't care about creations. In other words, we care about God, or we care about ourselves and others, but God doesn't, then we're better than God. If we cry at a child suffering and God does not cry at a child suffering or doesn't care about it, we are better than our creator. Then in which case you might as well be an atheist. So of course I believe that on rational grounds, that's why my big book is called The Rational Bible. because I believe that reason alone brings you to understand this narrative, this brilliant, brilliant narrative. And I always use, whenever I'm on radio or television for only 3 minutes or 5 minutes, they say, oh, give us an example. I always give the example of we're not told to love our parents. We're told to honor our parents. How powerful that is. I'll give you one other little thing. You said narrative. The book of Genesis is almost all narrative. There are almost no laws in the book of Genesis. The laws begin in Exodus. And what is Genesis mostly about? Families. The families of Abraham and Sarah, right? The families of even Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Every single family from Adam and Eve is dysfunctional. Is that clear in Romanian? That's very important. Okay, same word? I love it. So, what is the word exactly in Romanian? Dysfunctional. Perfect. Every single family, think about it. I consider that God's gift to humanity because most people come from troubled families. I often ask people, it's fun on the radio or even if I just meet them, in your extended family, was everybody normal? Just out of curiosity. And they laugh exactly like you're laughing. Because everybody has a crazy uncle, a nutty father, a mother who is a hysteric, it's a brother who is drunk. I mean, it is endless. So this is God's way of saying in Genesis, if you have problems in your family, know it's normal. Don't get too depressed. This is the way. These are, after all, these are the patriarchs, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Look at them, poor Adam and Eve. One of their sons kills the other. Bet you didn't have that in your family. That's pretty bad. Not many people could say that, their child killed their other child. And that's what happened to the first ones. And then Noah's children, one of them mocks his being naked, and the others hide his nakedness. And then Lot's children sleep with him, the ones saved in Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, it is just endless. And do you know that Abraham and Sarah divorced? This was pointed out to me by an Orthodox rabbi in Israel when I was in my 20s. Rabbi Pinchas Peli, may he rest in peace. After Abraham nearly sacrificed Isaac, they never talked to each other again. Abraham and Sarah did not even live in the same cities. There was no more contact between them. The marriage broke up after he went he didn't ever sacrifice, but went to sacrifice him. This is brilliant. This is insightful. Life is difficult. So this is a gift. This narrative, what is their better narrative? What is the secular narrative? I have the Bible. I always ask people, I've had a radio show for 33 years. Do you understand? For 33 years, I have talked to millions of people. And I have, from every background possible, atheist, anti-religious, leftist, rightist, fundamentalist, Christian, Jew, Muslim. It's been an education for me. And I ask people who are not religious, I admit, I get my wisdom from the Bible. Tell me where you get your wisdom from. And you know what they answer, the secular? From my life experience. Give me a break. That's what you got your wisdom from? So then there's no wisdom to be learned. Everybody has their own life experience. Then there's no such thing as wisdom. That means, do you know, there are kids who call my show. It's very touching. I get calls sometimes from 15, 16, 17-year-old boys and girls. And it's very interesting when they sound mature and have wisdom. Do you know what I say to them? I'm just curious. Do you come from a religious home? And 100% of the time, when they sound that mature and religious, not religious, and wise at 15, they came from a religious home.
All right, good. One more question, and then it's your turn, so I'll be relieved. Do you believe that there is only one human race? Answer by yes and no, and then I'll go on. Do you believe that there is just one human race?
Yes.
Do you believe that all men are born equal? Created
Right.
equal? Well, as an
Right.
American, I suppose you should. All right, good. So on that ground, I would like to ask you, why then encourage frontiers, borders? You see that evil Trump who separates kids from mothers and so on. Everybody knows now that Trump is worse than Kim Jong-un or whatever he's called. So why do we tolerate rich and poor? Isn't socialism more compassionate, which wants to abolish all these differences? Isn't communism an excellent idea? Of course, badly put in practice almost everywhere, actually everywhere, but for some strange reason, because it's the best idea. I mean, abolishing differences of race, differences of nation, differences of language, differences of culture, differences of superiority. I mean, why should our culture be superior to the one of the Amazon? I mean, isn't communism a good idea after all? What would you tell these young people? Some of them may be seduced by it because unfortunately they have forgotten it.
Well, what you said is exactly what they do say. I mean, you've asked many, many questions. First of all, on the rich and poor. I believe that leftism violates the 10th commandment: do not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's donkey, and so on. That's what it is. I've told the story so often in America. When I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And I grew up what I call in the middle of the middle class, absolutely middle class. We were not rich, but we certainly weren't poor. But my next door neighbor was considerably richer. And how did I know this as a kid? Every year he got a new Cadillac, which it was unbelievable to me that he could afford a Cadillac at all. My father bought an Oldsmobile. And in America, when I grew up, you knew how rich somebody was by the following. It went Cadillac, Buick, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, Chevrolet. That's how, those were the classes. Those were Marxian classes in America based on your car. So we had an Oldsmobile, that meant we were in the middle class. This guy not only had a Cadillac, he got a new one every year. And only later in life did I realize there was not a hint of resentment of my neighbor by my parents. All they said was, oh, look, Mr. Klein. I never knew his first name because we didn't know adults when I was a kid by first name. Look, Mr. Klein got his new Cadillac. So we would walk over, look at the Cadillac, and get very excited because it was much more exciting than our 10-year-old Oldsmobile. And that was it. It never occurred to me to be angry that Mr. Klein could get a Cadillac every year and I was stuck with a 10-year-old Oldsmobile. It never occurred to me. Mr. Klein had the good fortune of owning a business. My father did not own a business. He was an accountant, so he worked for other people constantly, or he worked for himself, but obviously doing other people's businesses, tax returns, and so on. And so what? It never, in America, this was a beautiful thing. In America, if the next guy was richer, you didn't say, make him poorer. You said, how can I be that rich? That was the American reaction to wealth. The left has destroyed it. Now it is bad that they are wealthier. But as I explained to students, a baseball player in America earns 100 times more than a teacher. Is it more than, or maybe at least 100 times more? Is that fair? No. So what should we do? Should we make a law baseball players earn less than teachers? Right? That would be fair. After all, teachers do more for society than baseball players. But that's where you get tyranny. As soon as you want equality of result, you end freedom. The moment there is freedom, there is inequality. That's the way it is. But so what? So what? I don't care if the next guy has more money. I care if I am prevented from making more money by a tyranny. I care if a tyranny says I can't be more free. I did give a speech. The one I gave at the University of Wyoming is on the internet. It is called Socialism Makes People Selfish. And I'll end with this. This is very important. America was founded on the following belief. I take care of me, I take care of my family, and then I take care of my community. Socialism is founded on the government takes care of me, the government takes care of my family, the government takes care of my community, which produces a better human being. It is as simple as that. Socialism produces people who believe they don't have to take care of anyone because the state will take care of everyone. That is terrible.
Amen to that. And now let's move on to you people. I'm sure you have plenty of questions to ask. Please, how shall we proceed? All right. Is there a microphone? Just put up your hand and come to wherever the microphone is. There. Over there. All right.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Prager. Welcome to Romania.
Thank you.
I do have a question for Dennis Prager, the expert communicator. Prager U is it's brilliant. You can send such powerful messages within 5 minutes. So, I'm assuming that in the 2 or 3 days you've been here, you could realize the mess our political landscape is. My question is, how can conservatives in Romania communicate clearly the conservative values and messages? Because here in Romania, very few understand what conservatism is, and Mihail Neamțu, I have to admit, did a big deal in that, explaining what conservatism is, and not only him, but him in my case.
All right, I think the question is clear. So what can we do
Yes.
to better communicate?
So I need you to understand something. Your question is 100% relevant to America. If I have a message, I did not know I would give you this message, okay? But it's become clear to me in just 3 days. You need to understand, you can't look to us anymore for these answers. You can look to things like PragerU, and I want you to, and we are working out a way to get them all out in Romanian. I mean, we know we change lives in 5 minutes. That's our business. That's the only reason we exist, is to get those ideas out. And if you can help, you will change people's minds. Not everyone, but anyone who has an open mind at all, there is a chance. But you must understand, do you know that the professor mentioned the Trump separating parents and children. First of all, that policy was done, you probably don't know this, it was done under Obama and it was done under George W. Bush. Number two, it was done, and does it go as far back as Clinton? Fine. Number two, the only reason that they were actually parents who came to America illegally and who were put in detention were put with their children. The most left-wing judges in America, the California-based judges, said children cannot stay with parents for more than 20 days in detention. That's when they got separated. In other words, the policy was keep them with their parents. But the left-wing court said kids can't be in detention with their parents. Number two, do you know that the Time magazine cover of the little girl crying next to big, gigantic Donald Trump? It was photoshopped. The Daily Mail in England showed the original photo. The girl was standing next to her mother. She was never separated from her mother. Time magazine's cover was 100% a lie. When Trump talks about the fake news, unfortunately he is right. Western news is a fraud. It bothers me terribly. We have a video out is it this week, Alan? With James O'Keefe? Just this week. He makes a brilliant point, this guy. He said in the Soviet Union, most Soviet citizens who read Pravda knew they were being lied to. The problem in the West is that they read the New York Times and they don't know they're being lied to. Now, the New York Times is not the same as Pravda. I'm not even claiming that. But it's much more subtle. I know. I was covered last year in an article in the New York Times, and they lied about me. And then the lie was repeated in Wikipedia, and I can't change my own Wikipedia page because the left has taken over the Wikipedia page on Dennis Prager. I mean, we live this stuff. So please, you say it's a mess here. It's a mess in America. It's a mess in England. It's a mess in France. The human situation is a mess. Romania is not unique, a mess. That's the good news for you, okay? Welcome to a messy world. That's why I want you to understand.
But I feel obliged to ask something, because there are very many people in Romania who are using this conservative discourse, denouncing the rottenness of very much in the West, to argue for preferring the East, and the East means Putin for Romania. So why should we still prefer the West, despite all these lies?
Western civilization is terrific. The West isn't. The West is rejecting Western civilization. They are tearing down pictures of great doctors at Harvard at its hospital because they're white males. That is a rejection of Western civilization, which says excellence is rewarded. The New York Times, I conduct orchestras periodically. Just last week, I conducted the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in Los Angeles. So this is my avocation, conducting. I know classical music. The New York Times had an article a few years ago. New York Times, most premier American newspaper. The 10 greatest classical composers. All right? So I read it. And now, I didn't expect to agree. It doesn't matter if I agree or disagree. But he did not include Handel, and he did not include Haydn. Haydn is the father of the symphony, the father of the quartet, the father of the piano trio, the father of the oratorio. I mean, he's unbelievable. He wasn't included. So the guy but who did he put in? Bartók and Stravinsky and Debussy, who are great, but not great as Handel and Haydn and Schubert, who were not included. So he said, I will tell you why I didn't include them. Because they all came from Vienna and also Germany, and I needed non-Germans and non-Viennese on the list. Bartók is Hungarian, Stravinsky's Russian, French, and Debussy's French. So in other words, it's not a list of the 10 greatest composers. It's a list of affirmative action on behalf of a lot of nationalities. That's what they do. Western civilization is based on what is best, not who wrote it. The greatest Bach interpreters in the world today are Japanese. They just recorded, how many cantatas did Bach write? How many hundreds? 600? They just recorded all of his cantatas. Suzuki is the conductor. And his orchestra is Japanese, and his chorus is Japanese, and they are considered the finest recordings of the Bach cantatas in the world. Because in Japan, they don't fool themselves. They don't believe Japanese music is as great as Bach. They know Bach is greatest. And Bach is greatest. As I tell people all the time, I love Jewish music. But you know what? Beethoven's third is better. All right? I know it. It doesn't mean a thing. I don't give a damn who is the best. I give a damn about what is the best. And if the best almost all turned out to be German and Viennese, then so be it. Then the best music was written by Germans and Viennese. End of issue. I think Wagner is great, and Wagner was an anti-Semite. Hitler loved Wagner, but Wagner was great. End of issue. Great is great. That's not what the West doesn't believe in Western civilization. So forget right now the West. Yes, I want you to embrace Western civilization, but don't embrace the West. The West is too confused right now.
Another question. please. There's one over there. Now, our colleagues wanted me to bring you always back to God when you were digressing. They told me, keep him on God. I must betray them. But I must tell them something. God and human greatness and great culture and great books and great music go together. Not only do we believe in God, but we also have good taste.
I interviewed the author of one of the greatest biographies of Bach, Sir John Eliot Gardner. John Eliot Gardner is one of the greatest Bach conductors living in the world today. He's British. He's not a religious man, as far as I know. And I asked him, I had no idea what he would say, but I always ask what is on my mind. And I said to him, can great music be written in a secular period? And he said, no.
Look at what's happening.
God, every piece of music Bach wrote, he wrote in Latin on the top for the glory of God. If you are secular, I told the Bucharest audience how much art today in the radically secular world, in the greatest museums, how much art concerns poop and urine and menstrual blood. This is what they have come to in the art world. You don't want to emulate that. Yes.
Hello, Mr. Breger. I would like to ask you why some conservatives like Ronald Reagan or the Iron Lady were so blamed and hated by the media. Meanwhile, some tyrants like Fidel Castro or Che Guevara were so praised by the media. How could that was possible and still is possible?
Their moral compass has been broken my whole life. I grew up liberal, never leftist, and I understood that the left's moral compass is broken. You hit. There is no question that the Western media hated Ronald Reagan, hate Donald Trump, hate Benjamin Netanyahu more than they hate their enemies. In other words, more than they hate Hamas. That's a perfect example in the case of Israel. There is a famous Hebrew saying, not from the Torah, but from the Talmud, the second holiest book in Judaism, and that is, those who are kind to the cruel will be cruel to the kind. And that is one of the mottos of the left. They are cruel to the kind and kind to the cruel. How many Westerners went from France and America to Venezuela to celebrate Hugo Chavez, socialist, because he's a socialist. He cared for the little man. He cared for equality. The richest country in Latin America is now the poorest. The middle class is ruined. People pick from garbage cans, thanks to socialism. But did one person who went down to celebrate Hugo Chavez say, I'm sorry? No, because here is something I wrote 30 years ago. Being on the left means never having to say you're sorry. That's a very important part of being on the left. They have supported Castro. Castro was a hero to the New York Times. Here's a perfect example. The left says, well, what are you talking about Castro? There's a 100% literacy rate in Cuba. That may be true. But hey, I always tell my audience, I'd rather be illiterate and free than literate and unfree. If I'm literate and all I could read is Communist Party propaganda, what's the good of being literate? If I'm illiterate, at least somebody could read to me the Bible, and somebody could read to me Orwell, and somebody could read to me Shakespeare. But if all I could read are, the collected works of Fidel Castro and other nonsense, or the Cuban Pravda, Granma, then what's the use of being literate? So this is, you need to know these arguments. You need to know how to make them. By the way, let me give you a great little suggestion. I adopted this on my radio program many years ago, and it is very effective. And I did this, and you can watch it. You could watch it, me at Berkeley. Again, it's on YouTube. I have a motto on my show. My motto is, I prefer clarity to agreement. It is more important for me to make clear where the person talking to me and I agree and disagree than it is to get them to agree with me. I never try to win an argument on my radio show. I try to explain where we differ. Then I win. Because when it's explained, so I will say, for example, oh, so in other words, you think people are basically good, and I don't think people are basically good. I won. Because if people think it through, they'll realize that that is right. But then they don't feel insulted. I don't humiliate anybody. You should try the same thing if you have people in your life. Wait a minute. Let's not argue. Let's just try to find out where we differ. You will find that is extremely helpful.
Anyone else?
Yes. Hello. So you are on God's side, so to speak.
I hope so.
And yet he's against homosexuals just as he is against murderers, since legally or thoroughly, if I may say so, they are both punished the same. So how can you have nothing against homosexuals, if I may quote you, since God has?
That's a very important question. I wrote a 17,000-word essay on the Bible and homosexuality, and when my volume of my 5-volume commentary on Leviticus comes out, it will even be longer. So let me just explain very quickly, because I could give you a whole lecture on this. There is no equation between murderers and homosexuals in the Bible, none whatsoever. It is true that it says that many different groups or many different sins, you are to kill the person, execute the person who has done that. After all, the man who gathered wood on the Sabbath is killed because God said that you should keep the Sabbath. Nobody in Jewish history ever believed that everybody who gathers wood on the Sabbath is executed, because if they did, there would be no Jews left. The Jews would have killed all the other Jews because so many Jews violate the Sabbath. So let me make one very important distinction between killing murderers and killing anybody else. Killing murderers is a basic moral law of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. It is the only law in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. There's only one law in all 5 books of the Torah, and that is to kill murderers. It is the second law God gives to humanity after the flood. First law, be fruitful and multiply. Second law, kill murderers. I believe in capital punishment for murder. I emphatically believe in it. I think it is cruel to keep every murderer alive. Some murderers shouldn't be killed, obviously. If it's only premeditated murder is executed in the Torah. So every other time it says that they will be put to death, it was never understood as literal. It was understood as the Torah's way of saying this is a serious sin. Is that clear? This is very important. Only one form of execution was meant to be taken literally, and that was murder. In every other case, it was understood as the Torah's way of saying this is serious. Why was male homosexuality considered such a serious infraction? Here is something I suspect none of you know. Every society in the world before the Hebrew Bible said homosexuality was okay. Only the Bible said it wasn't okay. That already is fascinating, because you would think all the Bible did was reinforce what every society said. Not true. In almost every society, and this is from gay historians, I made up none of this. In almost every society, if a man had money, he had a boy lover. In ancient Greece, the one we know the most about, men had women for babies and men for sex. The Torah came along, the Bible came along and said, men, you are to sexualize marriage. The purpose of sex in marriage is not just to produce babies. It is to enjoy each other sexually. You will channel your sex drive into your wife. That is what the Torah said in the most forceful language it could, which was, don't sleep with men. You should die if you do. But not one Jewish homosexual was killed in Jewish history. It was always understood as a sin, but never as something to be killed. The Torah created the family as we know it. It eroticized marriage. Make your wife the object of your sexual attention. If I am right, and it would seem to be that this is what history suggests, probably bisexuality is quite normal in the human species. That would seem to me to be, I don't identify it in me, I am thoroughly heterosexualized. But it doesn't matter. I am sure that my society had a lot to do with it. But in whatever the case may be, the Torah understood human sexuality and wanted it to be heterosexual. There are people who are not. I know this. At that Wyoming speech, the following happened. I received a call on my radio show the day before my speech at the University of Wyoming from a young man in Colorado. He's a Christian and he's gay. And he is a believing evangelical Christian, and he is torn by the fact that he is gay. And he lives with a man who is also evangelical. And as it happens, and he said, I'm coming to your speech tomorrow night. I just wanted you to know that, and God bless you, and so on. Fine. As God willed it, I can't explain it any other way. My wife, who was here, was with me then. We stepped out of the restaurant in Laramie, Wyoming, and sure enough, two young men met us by sheer coincidence. This gay evangelical Christian couple. And they almost in tears described their situation. They believed that it is sinful to be a homosexual, but they have zero interest in a female. This is the way they are, and this is my attitude. I will always teach what the Bible teaches, and I will explain it, but at the same time, I will always love the person who is involved in this particular sin. These men did not choose to be gay. There is no doubt, and any religious person who says they chose it is not being fair to these people. What should they do? I am not God. I did not tell them. But I told them, I said, I cannot compromise on what the Bible teaches, but I don't want you to be alone either. So I have a motto: be compassionate in the micro and keep your standards in the macro. I have kept my standards. I opposed same-sex marriage in America, and I got a lot of hatred for it. But at the same time, I do not beat up the gay. I don't mean literally, I mean even figuratively, because I understand the terrible dilemma that even a religious gay person can find himself in. There are gays who have said that they have come to lead a straight life because of Jesus Christ, or because of God, or because of whatever, and I don't deny their testimony. But when I speak to them privately, they do admit to me, at least the ones I spoke to, they're still attracted to men. But that's okay. God is not interested in who you're attracted to. God is interested in what you do. Remember? That was one of my important statements before. So we religious people, we have to walk a very, very tough but important thin line. We have to stand strongly in the belief, yes, it is God's ideal that one man marry one woman. I cannot compromise on that ideal. Do you know what is happening? In Newfoundland, in Canada, they just ruled that a child can have 3 parents. There is a child of a threesome. 2 men who love one woman make love to this woman. One of them impregnated her, and the child of that threesome, who is obviously not married, the child of that threesome has 3 parents under Canadian law. The 2 lovers of his mother are also his parents. And I said, once you say that the only thing that matters is who you love, then anything can happen. And it's happening. I have no doubt polygamy will be allowed in America or in Western Europe within 10 years, because there is no possible argument against it. If you are to marry whom you love, anyone can love more than one person. Then why can't you marry more than one person? We have nothing to be ashamed of for standing up for the belief that there is an ideal and it is male-female love. We acknowledge that not everyone can live that ideal. We acknowledge that. We love those people too. They are created in God's image just as much as a heterosexual is. But we cannot drop the ideal.
And if I may add, marriage is not about love, it's about responsibility. It's not about adults who love each other, but it's about children. That's why marriage was instituted, not to institutionalize love between adults. That's my take on it. But we have time for one last question from this nice bearded gentleman.
Shalom.
Shalom.
You, sir, strike me very much as a sex herb. That being said,
Six Herb is sexist, intolerant, xenophobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, and racist and bigoted.
that being said, I wanted to know if you think it's about time for the conservatives to put down their peacefulness and write down their own rules for radicals, since the original seems to work very well for the leftists?
I would put it this way, and I did put it, I did express it in my speech. The good have to fight. We have to fight fair, but we have to fight. And it's hard to fight because you get a lot of pushback and you will be hated. Here's one of my rules of life. You should aim to be loved by one person, your spouse. That's it. Oh, no, excuse me, and friends. You should work to be loved by your spouse and your friends. That's it. By the way, it's nice to be loved by your children. I'd want to add that. But you shouldn't aim to be loved by your children. You should aim to be honored by your children. That's a very important distinction, and it's very important. Parents do a lot of bad things trying to be loved. I have a motto. I made this up a long time ago when my children were little. I said, look, your kids are going to hate you anyway, so you might as well do the right thing. This is one of my many mottos in life. But if you want to be loved by everyone, you will do no good in this world. Now, I don't want you to be hated by everyone either. You shouldn't aim to be hated, and you shouldn't aim to be loved. You should aim to do what is right. And we have a guideline for what is right. I gave my argument for the biblical guideline, and that's what we have to do. And you do it lovingly, but you fight. So let me end, since that was the last question. You made reference to this fact, and I should like to as well. I am a Jew, and most of you are Christians. And something very beautiful may be happening. I say maybe because you can never predict the future. Finally, way too long, many Jews and many Christians are uniting to bring the world into the kingdom of God. It's language Christians use, it is language Jews use. And I can't think of anything more exciting The fact that a Christian organization brought a Jew from America to speak to you is a perfect example. And it makes perfect sense to me. Of course we don't have the same theology. So what? Really, so what in the final analysis? I am waiting the Messiah's first arrival. You are awaiting the second arrival. Okay. Whichever happens, I'm okay with it. I must say, I do not lose sleep over these issues. I lose sleep over evil. I lose sleep over a godless West that is raising aimless children. We share virtually everything. And we have to fight alongside each other. And it's a scary thing to the secular left if Jews and Christians unite. That's tough. That's going to be tough to beat. So as I said in Bucharest, and I'll say here, and now I've made the case, though. I really think I've made the case to you, because I know this is not how you're thinking. Maybe Romania will, and I don't say alone, but maybe you have to think maybe Romania has a better answer than England, even better than America now. I think the original American value system is the best. I love it. Limited government, in God we trust, and e pluribus unum, from many one. I think it's awesome. I wrote a book on it. It explains it. I think it's applicable, and it includes nationalism. I told you I want you to be strong Romanians. You can have that system, but America is abandoning that system. We're in trouble. Maybe you will be the leaders. There is no reason you shouldn't. There is none. Where is it going to come from? Do you know how confused they are in England? You know how confused they are in France? Do you know that the Swedish Prime Minister was asked, what are Swedish values? And she said, there's no such thing. The Swedish Prime Minister said it. There's no such thing. Sweden will not be Swedish in 20 years. And they don't care, because there's no such thing as Swedish. That's what they believe. There is no such thing as Swedish. God willing, there is something called Romanian, and that it is good, and we'll learn from you. Thank you for bringing me.
Câteva secunde vă mai reținem. Mulțumim domnului Dennis Prager, domnului Alan Estrin, soțiilor lor, Sue and Suzy. Mulțumim profesorului Adrian Papahagi, domnului Mihail Neamțu, călduroase mulțumiri. Călduroase mulțumiri sponsorilor noștri, fără de care acest eveniment nu era posibil. Mulțumim Casei de Cultură a Studenților și conducerii ei pentru disponibilitate și deschidere arătată. Voluntarilor implicați le mulțumim tare mult și vă mulțumim dumneavoastră, nu în ultimul rând, tuturor pentru prezență și sperăm că a fost un spectacol de idei pentru fiecare dintre noi. Nu uitam la ieșire de cartea domnului Dennis Prager, tradusă în limba noastră. Dennis va fi disponibil să ofere autografe și să imortalizeze momentul, dacă e cazul. Mulțumim încă o dată, o seară excelentă tuturor!